Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became a lantern of hope and faced the Sinestro core. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air on the rooftop was thin and cold, a stark contrast to the warmth of the afternoon sun that had baked the city streets below. Or perhaps it was Izuku Midoriya who was cold. He felt hollowed out, scoured clean by the 5 words that had just obliterated the very foundation of his existence. No, I don't think you can. All Might's voice, the voice that had narrated every one of Izuku's dreams, echoed in the sudden, cavernous silence. The hero was gone, having leapt away in a gust of wind that felt like a final, dismissive shove. Izuku was left alone with the rattling of a chain-link fence, and the ghost of his own question hanging in the air like smoke. Can I be a hero, even without a quirk? The question had been a tiny, flickering candle flame he had cupped in his hands for 10 agonizing years, protecting it from the hurricane-force winds of ridicule, pity, and cold, hard reality, from his classmates, his teachers, even his own mother's sorrowful eyes. He had guarded it, nurtured it, whispered to it in the dark. It was the last, most essential part of him, and All Might, his idol, his god, had just walked up and blown it out. Izuku's fingers were white where they gripped the fence. He stared out over the sprawling cityscape of Muzurifu, a vibrant tapestry of life and color that now seemed muted, as if he were looking at it through a gray filter. The distant sounds of traffic, the hum of a million lives moving forward, were a dull, mocking drone. His own life had just ground to a screeching halt. Be realistic, the hero had said. Realistic. The word was a slap. For his entire life, reality had been his enemy. Reality was the extra joint in his pinky toe. Reality was Bakugo's explosive sneer, and the nickname Deku. Reality was the sad, knowing looks from adults who saw him as a fragile thing to be handled with care, a problem with no solution. His dream was his rebellion against that reality. It was his declaration that he could be more than what fate had assigned him. And now, the number one hero, the symbol of peace himself, had sided with reality. He slowly, mechanically, let go of the fence. His legs felt like lead weights, each step an monumental effort. He walked to the stairwell door, his hand hovering over the cool metal of the handle. What was he supposed to do now? Go home? Walk into his room, a shrine dedicated to the very man who had just shattered him, and pretend everything was okay. Tell his mom he'd had a good day. The thought was so absurd it was almost funny, but the laugh that caught in his throat was a dry, painful sob. He fumbled with the handle and stumbled into the dim, concrete stairwell. The door clanged shut behind him, the sound unnaturally loud in the enclosed space. Each step down was a descent into a new, terrifyingly empty future. The police officer All Might had suggested. A doctor. Noble professions, sure. But they weren't the dream. The dream wasn't just about saving people. It was about standing in the face of overwhelming despair and being the one who could make everyone feel safe, just by smiling. It was about being a symbol. What kind of symbol could a quirkless, useless Deku be? A symbol of crushed aspirations? A cautionary tale for children who dared to dream too big. He finally reached the ground floor and pushed his way out into an alleyway. The sudden sunlight made him flinch. He blinked, his eyes adjusting, and his gaze fell to the object clutched in his hand, his notebook. Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. The pages were damp and warped from its time in the koi pond, and the cover was signed with the sprawling, confident signature of All Might. The autograph, once his most prized possession, now felt like a cruel joke. A consolation prize for the boy who would never make it. His fingers tightened around the notebook, his knuckles straining. He should just throw it away. Toss it into the nearest bin and be done with it. It was a logbook of a failed experiment, a diary of a fool's hope. He lifted his arm, his muscles tensing to hurl it into a nearby dumpster overflowing with trash. But he couldn't. His arm trembled, then fell back to his side. As much as it hurt, this notebook was still a part of him. It was 10 years of work, of passion, of a belief so powerful it had bordered on delusion. To throw it away would be to throw away the last piece of the boy who had dared to dream. And as broken as that boy was, Izuku wasn't ready to let him die completely. Not yet. He clutched the soggy book to his chest and began the long, shuffling walk home, a ghost haunting the sun-drenched streets of his own life. The city moved around him in a blur. People bustled past, their conversations a meaningless buzz, their bright clothes and vibrant quirks just flashes of color in his peripheral vision. Izuku walked with his head down, his green-black hair shadowing his face. He was an island of gray in a sea of life, his personal apocalypse unfolding unnoticed by the world. He thought of his mother. How could he face her? She would see it in his eyes instantly. She had always carried a quiet guilt about his quirklessness, a silent apology in every gentle touch and comforting meal. If she knew his dream was officially, irrevocably dead, it would break her heart all over again. He couldn't do that to her. He would have to lie. He would have to build a mask, a hollow smile, and wear it until it became a part of his face. The thought made a cold knot of dread tighten in his stomach. He was only 14, and already he was contemplating a life of quiet falsehood. A distant boom echoed through the buildings, rattling windows. It was followed by the shriek of sirens. Normally Izuku's head would have snapped up, his legs carrying him toward the sound before he'd even made a conscious decision to move. A villain attack. He'd have his notebook out, his mind racing, analyzing, observing. It was instinct. It was who he was, but today, the instinct was dead. His feet kept shuffling forward, one in front of the other, on the path home. What was the point? It wasn't his world to analyze anymore. He wasn't a hero in training, he was just a bystander. A civilian. He had to be realistic. Another, louder explosion ripped through the air, this one close enough to make him stumble. Screams followed. People were running now, their faces painted with panic. They flowed past him like a river parting around a stone. "A villain's got someone!" a man yelled as he ran past. "The heroes can't get close!" A woman shrieked. Against his will, against the crushing weight of his new reality, a flicker of the old Izuku sparked to life. His head lifted. He saw the smoke billowing from a narrow shopping arcade just a block away. He saw the familiar forms of the pro-heroes' death arms and backdraft trying to manage the chaos. He saw the crowd of onlookers, their phones held high, a wall of morbid curiosity. His feet, seemingly with a will of their own, began to move. Not with the frantic energy of a fan, but with a slow, dreadful pull, like a moth to a flame it knew would burn it. He pushed his way through the edge of the crowd, his smaller frame allowing him to slip between bodies until he had a clear view of the disaster, and his blood ran cold. It was him. The sludge villain. The same one All Might had captured not even an hour ago. The bottle must have slipped from his pocket during the jump. This was his fault. The thought was a dagger to his heart. If he hadn't grabbed onto All Might's leg, if he hadn't wasted the hero's time on that rooftop. The villain was a churning, chaotic mass of viscous green fluid, its eyes and teeth floating malevolently within the sludge. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was holding someone hostage, their bodies submerged, only their head and flailing arms visible. Explosions were erupting from within the villain's form, small, contained blasts that only seemed to make the sludge tighten its grip. Izuku watched the heroes struggle. Death Arms was strong, but he couldn't get a grip on the liquid villain. Kamui Woods was on the scene, but the entire alley was on fire from the explosions, and he was weak to fire. Empty Lady, who had just made her debut, was too big to even fit down the narrow street. They were all powerful, all amazing heroes, but in this specific situation, with these specific limitations, they were helpless. Then, Izuku saw the victim's face. Spiky blonde hair, wild and furious. Red eyes, wide with a terrifying emotion Izuku had never seen in them before. Fear. It was Kaken, Katsuki Bikugo. His childhood friend. His lifelong tormentor. The one who had told him to take a swan dive off the roof of the school just this morning. The one whose powerful quirk and arrogant confidence had been the yardstick against which Izuku had always measured his own worthlessness. And he was suffocating. He was terrified. He was going to die. Izuku's world narrowed to a single point, Bakugo's desperate, pleading eyes. He saw past the bully, past the years of taunts and casual cruelty. He saw a person who needed help. He saw a hero's panicked grimace, and the heroes weren't moving. They were waiting. Waiting for someone with the right quirk. Waiting for an opening that wasn't coming. Time seemed to slow down. The roar of the fire, the screams of the crowd, the frantic shouts of the heroes, it all faded into a distant hum. All that was left was the sight of Bakugo struggling, his explosions growing weaker, his movements more sluggish. No, a voice whispered in Izuku's soul. It was a tiny, defiant sound in the roaring silence of his despair. All Might's words echoed one last time, a final, ghostly warning. It's not wrong to dream. But you need to be realistic. Izuku's legs trembled. His knuckles were white where he gripped the strap of his yellow backpack. Every rational thought in his head, every piece of hard-won, painful realism, screamed at him to stay put. He was quirkless. He was a liability. He would only get in the way. He would die. But then he looked at Bakugo's eyes again. And he saw something else there, too. A reflection of his own feelings from just minutes ago on that rooftop. The terror of a dream dying. The horror of utter, absolute helplessness. And in that moment, Izuku Midoriya's body moved before his brain could tell it no. He wasn't running. He was flying. The world was a smear of colors and panicked faces. The shouts of the heroes, "Hey, kid! Stop! It's not safe!" were just wind in his ears. He didn't have a plan. He didn't have a quirk. He had a yellow backpack, a soggy notebook, and a completely, utterly illogical hope that he could do something. What am I doing? The rational part of his brain screamed. I'm going to die. But the part of him that was made of dreams and hero worship, the part that had watched the All Might debut video 10,000 times, the part that All Might himself had just tried to kill, roared back to life in a blaze of defiance. He needs a hero. The sludge villain's massive eyes swiveled to face him, surprise warring with malice. You again? It gurgled. Izuku's mind, honed by years of analysis, finally caught up to his legs. He couldn't hurt it. He couldn't fight it. But he could distract it. He needed to create an opening. He needed to give Bakugo a single second to breathe. With a desperate cry that was torn from the very depths of his soul, he swung his backpack off his shoulders and hurled it with all his might. The bag spun through the air, a pathetic yellow projectile against a monstrous green foe. It wasn't an attack. It was a prayer. The corner of his hardback textbook, perfectly angled by sheer, dumb luck, struck the villain directly in its right eye. The creature roared, a wet, guttural sound of pain and shock. Its gelatinous body shuddered, and for a fraction of a second, its grip on Bakugo loosened. Air. Bakugo gasped, a desperate, ragged intake of precious oxygen. Their eyes met for a heartbeat. Bakugo's were filled with stunned disbelief. Izuku's were filled with terrified determination. It was at that precise moment, the absolute apex of Izuku's selfless, hopeless, and profoundly heroic act, that the universe answered. It wasn't a sound, at first. It was a feeling. A sudden, impossible warmth that spread through the very air, pushing back the heat of the fire and the cold chill of fear. Then came the light. From the clear blue sky, a single point of brilliance emerged, brighter than any star. It wasn't the harsh white gold of the sun, but a deep, calming, celestial sapphire. It streaked downward, not with the chaotic violence of a meteor, but with the gentle, unerring purpose of a celestial messenger. It left a trail of shimmering azure motes in its wake, a ribbon of pure color painted across the sky. No one else seemed to notice it at first. Their attention was on the quirkless boy scrabbling uselessly at the sludge, trying to free his rival. But Izuku felt it. He felt its approach like a resonant hum in his bones, a song that spoke a language of courage and faith that he had unknowingly been fluent in his entire life. The comet of blue light shot past the rooftops and dove into the alleyway. It didn't explode. It didn't crash. It simply arrived. With a soft, musical chime that cut through the chaos like a crystal bell, it resolved into a small, simple object, a ring. It was a deep, polished blue, inscribed with a symbol he didn't recognize, a stylized lantern. The ring hovered in the air for less than a nanosecond before it shot forward and slid onto the ring finger of Izuku's right hand. It was a perfect fit. It felt cool against his skin, and impossibly ancient. For a moment, nothing happened. The villain, having recovered from the backpack strike, surged forward, a massive tendril of sludge aimed at crushing the life out of this insignificant gnat. Izuku threw his hands up in a desperate, instinctual gesture of defense. The ring flared. A torrent of brilliant blue light erupted from the simple band, not with the destructive force of Bakugo's quirk, but with the generative, life-affirming energy of a sunrise. It was the color of a clear sky after a storm, the color of a deep, calm ocean. It was the color of hope. The light swirled in front of Izuku, coalescing. It didn't form a weapon. It didn't form a fist. Responding to the deepest, most desperate desire in Izuku's heart, the need to protect, to shield, to save, it formed a massive, shimmering, translucent blue shield. It was perfectly circular, intricate patterns swirling across its surface like frost on a window pane. It hummed with a low, steady thrum, a sound that seemed to say, "All will be well." The sludge tendrils slammed into the construct. There was no impact, no sound of collision. The villain's attack simply stopped. The blue light of the shield met the foul green of the sludge, and it was not a battle of force, but of concept. Filth against purity. Despair against faith. The shield held, not straining, not cracking, but effortlessly and absolutely denying the attack. It pulsed once, a gentle wave of azure energy, and the sludge was thrown back, creating a 10-foot space of clear air around Izuku and Bakugo. The entire alley fell silent. The crowd, the heroes, Bakugo, even the villain, everyone stared, dumbfounded, at the impossible sight. A quirkless boy, a nobody, was holding back a monster with a shield made of starlight. And in that moment of stunned silence, one person was shocked out of their stupor. All Might, in his skeletal form, had been standing in the crowd, clutching his side, his body screaming at him for having reached his limit. He had been watching in horror, his own words about realism and prudence turning to ash in his mouth, as he saw the boy he had just lectured charge into certain death. But what he saw now was not death. It was a miracle. A symbol not of power, but of something far, far greater. That impossible blue shield, that boy's unwavering courage, it was a spark. And it was all the hero needed. Pathetic. Toshinori Yagi whispered to himself, a surge of shame and adrenaline coursing through him. Even a child could see what needed to be done. He forced his body to obey, ignoring the screaming pain. He powered up. Steam billowed, muscles expanded, and in a flash, the symbol of peace was back. I really am pathetic. All Might boomed, his voice a tidal wave of confidence, as he landed between the villain and the boys. He grabbed Izuku and Bakugo, pulling them clear. I preached the tenets of heroics, but I failed to live by them myself. He planted his feet, cocked his fist back, the power of one for all crackling around him. Pros are always risking their lives. That's the true test of a hero. He looked at the villain, his signature smile a grim line of absolute certainty. Detroit. Smash! The punch was a force of nature. The wind pressure it generated was a localized hurricane, tearing the sludge villain apart, scattering its liquid body into harmless droplets. The air pressure changed so drastically that the very clouds above seemed to part, and a moment later, a light rain began to fall. The battle was over. In the immediate aftermath, chaos gave way to a stunned, rain-soaked quiet. The reporters swarmed All Might, their camera flashes like lightning in the gloomy alley. Paramedics rushed to check on Bakugo, who was conscious but shaken, coughing up residual sludge. The other pro-heroes were securing the area, their faces a mixture of relief and utter bewilderment. And in the middle of it all, ignored for the moment, stood Izuku Midoriya. He was trembling, not from fear, but from a profound, world-altering shock that ran deeper than his bones. The rain plastered his hair to his forehead. His clothes were soaked. But he felt none of it. All of his awareness was focused on the ring finger of his right hand. The shield was gone, the light faded. But the ring remained. A simple, elegant band of deep blue metal, cool and solid. It felt as though it had always been there. He slowly raised his hand, staring at it. Was it a quirk? Had his quirk manifested late, triggered by the stress? No, that didn't feel right. This felt other. Alien. Ancient. He could still feel a faint, gentle warmth pulsing from it, a quiet hum that resonated with the frantic, hopeful beating of his own heart. He was dimly aware of the pro-heroes, Kamui Woods and Death Arms, stomping over to him. He braced himself for the lecture. That was incredibly reckless, kid. You could have been killed. Death Arms boomed, though his voice lacked its usual intimidating force. There was no reason for you to put yourself in that kind of danger. Kamui Woods added, his wooden features somehow conveying a deep-seated confusion. They scolded him, but their words were hollow. They had all seen it. They had all seen the shield. They couldn't reconcile the image of the suicidal, quirkless boy with the wielder of that impossible power. Their lecture trailed off into an awkward silence as they just stared at him. But then, other voices cut in. That was amazing! You created an opening for All Might. Your quirk is incredible. What is it? A small crowd of onlookers who had stayed behind were praising him. Their words washed over him, but they didn't register. Quirk? It wasn't a quirk. It was something more. He was shaken from his stupor when a furious Bakugo stomped over and got in his face, shoving him back a step. Deku! He snarled, his voice raw. I didn't need you to save me. I had it handled. What was that trick? Some kind of new support gear? You think you're better than me? The usual venom was there, but beneath it, Izuku could see the lingering fear, and a deep, unsettling confusion. Bakugo didn't understand what had happened, and that terrified him more than any villain. Before Izuku could even attempt to form an answer, Bakugo just scoffed, turned, and stormed off, unable to process the event that had so thoroughly violated his understanding of the world. Izuku watched him go, then looked back down at his hand. He was alone again, an island in the middle of the cleanup operation. He flexed his fingers. The ring was real. The shield had been real. As if in response to his thoughts, a voice spoke. It did not come from the air around him. It bloomed directly within his mind, as clear as his own thoughts, yet distinctly separate. It was calm, resonant, and filled with a timeless, unwavering peace. Izuku Midoriya of Earth. Izuku froze, his eyes widening. He looked around wildly, but no one was near him. The voice continued, its tone one of profound, cosmic validation. It spoke not just to his ears, but to his very soul, filling the hollowed-out space where his dream had died with a warm, blue light. You have the ability to instill great hope. Hope. The word resonated through him. That's what he had felt when he ran forward. Not confidence, not power. Just a desperate, illogical, world-defying hope that he could make a difference. Welcome to the Blue Lantern Corps. Blue Lantern Corps? The name meant nothing to him, but the feeling behind it was immense. A sense of belonging. A sense of purpose. A sense of a destiny far greater and more wondrous than he could have ever imagined. He just stood there, rain dripping from his nose, the world spinning around him, trying to comprehend the 3 sentences that had just rewritten his entire reality. A large shadow fell over him. Izuku looked up, his heart skipping a beat. All Might stood before him, no longer smiling his camera-ready grin. The hero's face was a complex mask of awe, confusion, and a deep, searching curiosity. He looked from Izuku's wide, tear-filled eyes down to the small blue ring on his finger, and then back up again. He had seen the boy's file when he gave the police his statement. Quirkless. It was stated in bold letters. And yet, the number 1 hero, the symbol of peace, the man who had crushed his dream and then witnessed its impossible rebirth, leaned forward slightly. His voice, stripped of all its usual bravado, was quiet, serious, and filled with a wonder that bordered on reverence. Young man, All Might asked, his blue eyes searching Izuku's for an answer to a question that suddenly seemed to encompass the entire world. What are you? The walk home was a disorienting haze. Izuku Midoriya moved through the familiar streets of his neighborhood like a stranger, the world muted and distant. The cold, alien weight of the ring on his finger was a constant, thrumming reminder that nothing was familiar anymore. He was acutely aware of every person who passed him, his hand instinctively curling into a fist to hide the impossible blue band. How could he explain it? What would he even say? He finally reached his apartment building, the scent of rain-soaked concrete, and the faint aroma of his neighbors cooking doing little to ground him. He paused at his front door, his hand hovering over the knob. He could hear his mother pacing inside, the soft, worried shuffle of her slippers on the wooden floor. She would have seen the news. She would be terrified. The thought of adding the impossible truth of his situation to her anxiety felt like an act of cruelty. He took a deep breath, plastered on the most convincing smile he could manage, and walked inside. Izuku! Oh, thank goodness! Inko Midoriya rushed to him, her face a mess of tears and relief. She fussed over him, her hands checking him for injuries he didn't have. I saw the news, that villain, and they said a student ran in. Izuku, I was so worried. I am okay, Mom. Really? He said, his voice strained. The lie tasted like ash in his mouth. I was just nearby. The heroes handled it. And All Might was there. It was amazing. He hated the lie. He hated the way her shoulders relaxed, the way the terror in her eyes receded, replaced by simple, maternal concern. But the truth was a mountain he couldn't ask her to climb right now. He wasn't even sure he could climb it himself. He managed to extricate himself and retreat to the sanctuary of his room. He closed the door, the soft click of the latch sounding like a vault sealing him away from the normal world. His room was a shrine to his former life. All Might posters covered every inch of wall space, the hero's signature smile beaming down from every angle. The action figures on his shelves were posed in dynamic, heroic stances. It was the bedroom of a boy with a single, all-consuming dream, a dream that was now dead, replaced by something far stranger. He sank onto his bed, the springs groaning in protest. Slowly, as if it might bite him, he raised his right hand and stared at the ring. It was a simple, elegant band of a deep, unearthly blue, utterly seamless. The stylized lantern symbol etched into its surface seemed to pulse with a faint, internal light, like a sleeping star. Welcome to the Blue Lantern Corps, the voice echoed in his memory. It had been so clear, so real. He tentatively reached out with his thoughts, a silent, desperate question. What are you? What is this? The response was not in words, but in a flood of pure information that poured directly into his consciousness. It was overwhelming, a torrent of cosmic knowledge that made his head spin. He saw colors, a spectrum of light, vast and infinite, but dominated by 7 distinct hues. Each color was tied to an emotion, a fundamental force of the universe. He saw the crimson rage of a creature with napalm for blood, the greedy orange light of a thief clutching a power source, the sickly yellow glow of a monstrous insected creature inspiring terror, the sharp green beam of a man with an iron will, the indigo light of compassion, and the ethereal violet of love. And then he saw his own color. Blue. It wasn't a raging fire or a sharp beam. It was a vast, peaceful ocean of light. The accompanying concept flowed into him, a truth he understood on a cellular level. Hope. The blue light of hope. It was the belief in a better future, the faith that carried one through the darkest night, the light that sparked in others when they saw someone refuse to give up. He understood, with a sudden, staggering clarity, why the ring had chosen him. Running toward that villain, quirkless and terrified, with no plan and no chance of success, it hadn't been an act of power or will. It had been an act of pure, unadulterated hope, a desperate gamble on the possibility of a better outcome. The knowledge continued to flow. He learned the name of the ring's creators, the Guardians Ganthet and said, who had left the rigid logic of the Green Lantern Corps to found their own. He learned of their home, the tranquil planet Autumn. He learned the sacred oath of the Corps, the words settling into his mind as if he had known them his entire life. In fearful day, in raging night, with strong hearts full, our souls ignite. When all seems lost in the war of light, look to the stars, for hope burns bright. Tears welled in Izuku's eyes as he mentally recited the words. They were a perfect encapsulation of his entire existence. A life lived in the fearful day of ridicule, in the raging night of self-doubt, his heart always stubbornly full, refusing to let his soul's flame be extinguished. Then came the practical knowledge, and with it, a crushing limitation. The ring could grant him flight, a protective aura for survival in any environment, and a universal translator. It could heal wounds and recharge the rings of the green lanterns of willpower. Its most potent ability was to inspire hope in others, calming panic and bolstering courage. But on its own, its offensive capabilities were almost nil. A blue lantern was a force multiplier, a battery, a symbol. To create the complex, powerful constructs he had seen in the fleeting images of the green lanterns, he needed to be near one. The green light of willpower gave the blue light of hope form and function. Without it, he was a shield, not a sword. His heart sank. So he still couldn't fight on his own? He still had to rely on someone else? The old feelings of inadequacy began to creep back in, a familiar, chilling poison. Driven by a need to see, to test, to know this was real, he focused on the ring. He pictured All Might, his idol, his inspiration. He wanted to create a construct, a simple one. He pictured All Might's fist, a symbol of ultimate power. He pushed his own hope, what little he could muster, into the ring. A faint, shimmering blue light flickered into existence above his palm. It vaguely took the shape of a fist, but it was translucent, wavering like a heat haze. It was no bigger than his own hand and looked as substantial as a soap bubble. After a few seconds of trembling in the air, it sputtered and vanished with a soft, pathetic pop. Izuku stared at his empty palm. His hope, already fragile after the day's emotional roller coaster, plummeted. The ring had told him it was fueled by his own hope. But what hope did he really have? For 10 years, the world had systematically dismantled it. He had been told he was worthless, useless, a dreamer who needed to face reality. All Might's words on the rooftop, though spoken by a different man, were just the final, authoritative confirmation of what everyone else had always thought. He had this incredible, cosmic power on his finger, a gift from the stars themselves. And he couldn't even use it. Maybe All Might had been right after all. The ring on his finger felt cold. He couldn't practice in his room. He couldn't risk his mom seeing a flicker of blue light under his door. He needed somewhere secluded, somewhere no one would go, especially at night. His mind immediately went to Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. It wasn't really a park, not anymore. Decades of illegal dumping, amplified by shifting ocean currents, had turned it into a municipal trash heap. It was a testament to societal neglect, a place where things went to be forgotten. Mountains of rusted appliances, tangled nets, broken furniture, and mountains of discarded plastic created a hazardous, metallic landscape that stretched down to the shoreline. The air was thick with the smell of rust, stagnant water, and the salty tang of the sea, a perfume of decay. It was perfect. Under the faint light of a crescent moon, Izuku stood before a mountain of junk, the waves crashing softly behind him. This place, it felt like a physical manifestation of his own self-worth. A garbage heap of broken dreams. Okay, he whispered to himself, his breath fogging in the cool night air. Let's try this again. He focused. He thought about his desire to be a hero, the core of his being. He tried to summon that feeling of hope he'd had in the alley. The ring glowed faintly. Flight first, he thought. The ring's primer had told him it was instinctual. Just believe you can fly. He channeled his hope, bent his knees, and leaped into the air. For a glorious second, he felt a strange buoyancy. He wasn't falling. He was hovering, a shaky, uncontrolled hover, a foot off the ground, but it was working. A grin spread across his face. Then, a stray thought, a seed of doubt, sprouted in his mind. This is impossible. People can't fly. The blue light around him flickered and died. Gravity reasserted its authority with a vengeance. Izuku yelped as he tumbled unceremoniously into a pile of discarded tires and greasy fast food bags. He groaned, pushing himself up, smelling faintly of old rubber and seagull droppings. His hope, a flickering candle flame, had been extinguished by a single gust of doubt. He tried again. And again. For over an hour, he repeated the process. He'd manage a few feet of shaky flight, his heart soaring, only for the deeply ingrained belief in his own powerlessness to drag him back down to earth, often into something sharp or smelly. Frustration began to curdle into despair. He finally slumped against a broken refrigerator, his body aching, his spirit bruised. He looked at the ring, its blue light now dim, almost sullen. Why? He asked the silent piece of metal. Why did you choose me if I can't even do this? If my own hope is so weak? He tried to construct next. Not something complex. Just the shield from before. He remembered the feeling, the desperate need to protect. He focused on that, holding his hand out. A blue shimmer appeared, forming a small, dinner plate-sized disk of light. It was barely opaque, and the edges wavered violently. He could see the junk pile on the other side through it. He poked it with a finger from his other hand. His finger went right through it as the construct dissolved into a puff of blue motes. It was useless. A paper shield. A cold, hard lump formed in his throat. This was a mistake. The ring had made a mistake. It had picked a boy whose well of hope had been poisoned for a decade. There was nothing for it to draw from. He was just a quirkless, useless Deku with a fancy piece of jewelry. He buried his face in his hands, the weight of his failure pressing down on him, heavier than any of the trash piled around him. The gentle sound of the waves was a mocking whisper. The dream had died on the rooftop, been reborn in the alley, and now, here on this forgotten beach, it was dying all over again. He spent the next few days in a fog of quiet desperation. He'd go to school, endure the whispers about his encounter with the sludge villain, some calling him a hero, others a reckless idiot. Bakugo shot him venomous looks but kept his distance, unable to reconcile the Deku he knew with the boy who had manifested as Shield of Light. At night, Izuku would sneak out to the beach and fail, over and over, his frustration mounting with each sputtered construct and clumsy fall. It was on the fourth day that his secret training ground was discovered. He was sitting on a rusted-out washing machine, staring blankly at the sea, when a shadow fell over him. He flinched, expecting a security guard or a vagrant. A bit of a grim spot for sightseeing, don't you think? Izuku's head snapped up. Standing before him was a man so skeletal he looked like he might be carried away by a strong sea breeze. He wore baggy cargo pants and a loose-fitting t-shirt, and his blonde hair fell in two prominent bangs around his gaunt, shadowed face. It was All Might. Izuku scrambled to his feet, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Hey, All Might! What are you doing here?" Toshinori Yagi, the man within the hero, gave a tired sigh, a small trickle of blood escaping the corner of his mouth. He wiped it away with the back of his hand. "Looking for you, young Midoriya. You weren't exactly hard to track down." He gestured vaguely at the mountains of trash. "I must admit I'm curious. Why here?" Izuku's face burned with shame. He couldn't tell him the truth, couldn't admit his pathetic failures. Just like the quiet," he mumbled, looking down at his shoes. Toshinori's gaze was sharp, his sunken blue eyes missing nothing. He glanced at the scuffs on Izuku's uniform, the grease stain on his trousers, and the look of utter defeat on his face. He then looked at the boy's right hand, where the blue ring sat, inert but undeniable. "The ring," Toshinori said, his voice soft. "That's what this is about, isn't it? You're trying to understand that power." Izuku flinched, but didn't deny it. He just nodded, his shoulders slumping. "And it's not going well," Toshinori concluded. It wasn't a question. Izuku finally broke. The frustration and despair of the past few days came pouring out of him. "I can't do it!" he cried, his voice cracking. "The ring, it's powered by hope. But mine it's broken, I think. Every time I try, I just remember everything everyone's ever said. That I'm quirkless, that I'm useless. I remember you on the rooftop telling me to be realistic. How can I hope when my whole life has been one big reality check?" He was breathing heavily, tears blurring his vision. He expected pity, or maybe a gentle dismissal. What he didn't expect was for Toshinori to sit down on the washing machine next to him, the metal groaning under even his slight weight. They sat in silence for a long moment, the only sound the cry of gulls and the sigh of the ocean. "When I was starting out," Toshinori said, his voice quiet and raspy, "I had a power that was too big for my body. Every time I used it, I would break myself. Shatter my bones. My mentor told me my body was an unprepared vessel. I had to build it up, piece by piece, until it could handle the power within." He looked at Izuku, his expression serious. "Power isn't something you just have, young Midoriya. It's something you build. Whether it's muscle, or skill, or, in your case, hope, you can't just will it into existence. You have to create it. You have to give yourself a reason to believe." Izuku stared at him, the hero's words sinking in. Give yourself a reason to believe? He had been trying to draw from an empty well. What he needed to do was find a way to fill it. His gaze drifted from Toshinori to the beach around them. The endless expanse of garbage. An eyesore. A symbol of failure and neglect. An impossible task. An idea, so crazy and so perfect it stole his breath, began to form in his mind. This place, Izuku said, his voice barely a whisper. It's been like this for years. No one's done anything. The heroes are too busy, and the city. I guess they just gave up on it. He looked at the mountain of rusted metal and decaying plastic, a task that would take one person a lifetime. If I could clean this place up, if I could take this symbol of despair and turn it into something people could enjoy, something that brought them happiness. He looked at his hands, then at the ring. That would be a reason to hope, wouldn't it? Toshinori Yagi looked at the quirkless boy next to him, who was proposing to single-handedly move a mountain of trash not for strength, but for philosophy. He saw the flicker in the boy's eyes, the first genuine spark he'd seen since the alleyway. And for the first time since their meeting on that rooftop, Toshinori felt a surge of his own hope. He had been wrong about this boy. So profoundly, cosmically wrong. Yes, young Midoriya, he said, a rare, genuine smile touching his thin lips. I think it would. He stood up, his joints popping. But a hero needs more than just hope. They need a sharp mind. Strategy, analysis. He tapped his temple. Your notebooks are brilliant. You have the mind of an analyst. But you need to learn to apply it under pressure. He offered a proposal. A new kind of mentorship. You work on filling your well, Toshinori said, gesturing to the beach. And I will train you in everything else. Hero law. Quirk analysis. Battle tactics. I cannot give you a quirk, young Midoriya. What you have is already beyond me. But I can help you become a hero. Izuku stared at him, his mouth agape. All Might, his idol, was offering to be his personal tutor. To train him to be a hero. Not by giving him power, but by honing the skills he already had. It was everything he had ever wanted, offered in a way he had never expected. Tears streamed down his face, but for the first time that day, they were tears of joy. Yes, he choked out, bowing low. Yes, please. Thank you. A partnership was formed on that trash-strewn beach. A new path was set. The work was about to begin. The next 10 months were the most grueling and rewarding of Izuku's life. His days fell into a rigorous pattern. School, then straight to the beach. He started with the small stuff, hauling bags of garbage to the designated pickup area Toshinori had arranged with the city. It was back-breaking work. His muscles screamed, his hands blistered, but he didn't stop. And as he worked, something amazing began to happen. After the first week, he had cleared a small 10 by 10 foot patch of sand. It wasn't much, but it was his. He had done it. Standing on that little square of clean beach, he felt a flicker of genuine pride. He raised his hand, and the blue light that formed a shield was a little brighter, a little more solid. It held for a full 30 seconds before dissipating. That small victory was all the fuel he needed. He began hauling larger items. He found a thick rope and started dragging refrigerators and washing machines across the sand. With every piece of trash he removed, every square foot of beach he reclaimed, he felt his inner reservoir of hope rise. The ring responded in kind. When he needed to see inside a dark, hollowed-out TV set, a small, steady ball of blue light would appear in his palm. When a heavy tire was just on the verge of rolling back down a pile, a gentle push from a simple telekinetic construct would hold it in place. His power wasn't growing through practice, but through purpose. His training with Toshinori was just as intense. Several times a week, the skeletal hero would meet him on a cleared patch of sand. He would drill Izuku on hero history, ethics, and law. He presented Izuku with footage of villain fights and had him analyze them on the spot. Okay, young Midoriya, look at this, Toshinori would say, pointing to a paused video on a tablet. The villain's quirk allows him to stretch his limbs. Kamui Woods is trying to bind him. What's the flaw in that strategy? The villain isn't just elastic, he's malleable. Izuku would answer, his mind racing. Kamui's lacquered chain prison is strong, but the villain can just ooze through the gaps. He needs a different approach, someone with a freezing quirk to make him brittle, or a hero who can deliver a wide-area concussive blast to disorient him. Exactly! Toshinori would beam, his pride evident. Your mind is your greatest weapon, my boy. Never forget that. That ring on your finger is a powerful tool, but the mind that wields it is what makes a hero. Izuku absorbed it all like a sponge. He filled notebook after notebook, not just with fanboy observations, but with practical, tactical analysis. He was learning how to think like a hero. The physical and spiritual transformation was stunning. The scrawny, timid boy began to fill out, his body toned and hardened by the months of physical labor. But the more profound change was internal. The slump in his shoulders was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. The nervous stutter that had plagued him for years began to fade. He no longer looked at the ground when he walked. He was no longer a boy waiting for permission to be a hero. He was forging himself into one, piece by piece. Finally, the day of the UA entrance exam arrived. Izuku stood on the cliff overlooking the beach at sunrise. It was unrecognizable. The mountains of trash were gone. Below him was a vast expanse of clean, golden sand, stretching down to meet the pristine blue water. A few early morning joggers were already using the path he had cleared. He saw a family with a small child laughing as they ran toward the waves. He had done it. He had taken a place of absolute neglect and turned it into a source of happiness. A symbol of hope. Tashinori stood beside him, looking more solid and healthier than Izuku had ever seen him. "You did it, my boy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. He placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder. "You moved a mountain. I am so proud of you." Izuku looked out at the sunrise painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. He felt a surge of hope so pure and powerful it was like a star igniting in his chest. It wasn't borrowed from All Might. It wasn't a desperate wish. It was his. He had earned it. He had built it with his own 2 hands. He knew what he had to do. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath of the clean sea air, and for the first time, he spoke the oath aloud. His voice was clear and steady, echoing in the morning quiet. "In fearful day, in raging night." The ring on his finger began to glow, a soft hum building in the air. "With strong hearts full, our souls ignite." The glow intensified, a brilliant azure light enveloping his hand, his arm, his entire body. It was warm, powerful, and utterly serene. When all seems lost in the war of light, he focused on his inspiration. Not just the hero of his childhood, but the man who had become his mentor. The symbol of peace, the smiling face that told the world that everything was going to be okay. He poured all of his hard-won hope, all of his gratitude, all of his unshakable faith and heroism into the ring. "Look to the stars, for hope burns bright." He opened his eyes and thrust his hand forward. A torrent of blue light erupted, not flickering, not translucent, but solid, vibrant, and overwhelmingly bright. It coalesced in the air in front of him, forming a perfect, colossal construct. It was the smiling face of All Might, 10 feet tall, crafted from pure, unadulterated hope. It didn't just look like him, it felt like him. It radiated an aura of safety, of courage, of the unwavering certainty that no matter how bad things got, a hero would be there to save the day. It was the most beautiful thing Izuku had ever created. He held the construct for a full minute, stable and brilliant against the rising sun, before letting it peacefully dissipate into the morning air. He had done it. He understood now. The ring wasn't a weapon to be mastered. It was a part of him, a reflection of his soul. And his soul was finally full. He was ready. Far away, in a sector of space so distant its light had not yet reached Earth, lay the planet Korrigar. Once a world of vibrant culture, it was now a place of stark, rigid order. The architecture was severe, all sharp angles and imposing black metal, illuminated by the constant, sickly yellow glow of fear. In the central citadel, upon a throne of polished obsidian, sat a being of immense and terrible presence. He was tall and regal, his skin a deep magenta, his features sharp and aristocratic. He wore a uniform of black and gold, and on his finger was a ring that pulsed with a malevolent yellow light. This was Sinestro, former Green Lantern, now Lord and Master of his own corps, a galactic army built on the principle that only fear could create true, lasting order. He was observing a holographic map of the known universe when a subordinate, a hulking, tusked creature named Archilo, approached and knelt. "My lord," Archilo growled, his voice like grinding stone. "A report from the deep space energy monitors." Sinestro did not turn. His gaze remained fixed on the star chart. Speak, a massive energy surge has been detected. From Sector 2814, Sinestro's hand, which had been resting on the arm of his throne, paused. Sector 2814 was a backwater, a galactic nursery full of primitive, chaotic worlds. He had written it off as strategically insignificant decades ago. Specify the energy signature, Sinestro commanded, his voice cold and precise. That is the anomaly, Lord Sinestro, Archilo said, a hint of confusion in his tone. The surge was blue, of an intensity we have not registered since the guardianship of Ganthet, and said, the throne room seemed to grow colder. The name of his old enemies, the founders of the Blue Lanterns, hung in the air like a curse. For centuries, the Blue Lantern Corps had been all but extinct, their light of hope a forgotten fairy tale in a universe that had learned to fear. Sinestro finally turned his head, his piercing yellow eyes narrowing. A surge of hope that powerful, from a previously dead sector? It was not a random occurrence. It was a declaration. An old, hated enemy was stirring from its slumber. Hope, Sinestro whispered, the word a bitter taste. An illogical, chaotic emotion. A cancer that offers false comfort and breeds rebellion. He stood, his full height imposing and absolute. The yellow light of his ring flared, casting long, monstrous shadows across the chamber. Hope is an illusion, he declared to the silent room. And it is time it was extinguished, once and for all. He looked down at his most fearsome lieutenant. His command was simple, cold, and utterly final. Archilo, take a platoon. Go to Sector 2814. Find the source of this light, and snuff it out. Cowus Goro was a creature of alleyways and shadows. He had a quirk perfectly suited to his pathetic station in life, anxiety spike. He couldn't create illusions or command obedience. All he could do was find the tiny, pre-existing knot of fear in a person's gut and give it a sharp, cruel twist. A woman walking home alone would suddenly become convinced the footsteps behind her were a predator, fumbling with her keys and dropping her purse. A man at an ATM would be overcome with a wave of irrational paranoia, hastily stuffing his cash into his pocket and leaving himself open to a pickpocket. Goro was not a villain, he was a parasite, feeding on the low-level terror that permeated modern society. And today, he was starving. His last 3 attempts had been failures. A salaryman whose anxiety was so chronic that Goro's quirk barely registered. A teenage girl who, instead of panicking, had turned and blasted him with a face full of pepper spray. And now this. He was cornered in a dead-end alley, the sirens wailing closer, 2 police officers with their guns drawn standing at the entrance. Nowhere to run, buddy, the older officer said, his voice steady, though Goro could feel the faint tremor of adrenaline beneath the surface. Drop the wallet and put your hands up. Fear, cold and sharp, coiled in Goro's stomach. Not the controlled, weaponized fear he inflicted on others, but the raw, primal terror of a trapped animal. Prison. Years of it. He could almost feel the cold walls, the loss of freedom, the casual brutality of men far stronger than him. His own fear was a beacon, a lighthouse of pure, selfish dread. He instinctively lashed out with his quirk, pushing all of his own terror into the 2 men. He didn't want to hurt them, he just wanted them to hesitate, to feel a sliver of the panic that was consuming him. The effect was stronger than he'd ever managed before. The younger officer's gun hand trembled violently. The older one's eyes darted left and right, suddenly terrified of an ambush from the empty, trash-strewn alley. It was a feedback loop. His fear amplified their fear, which in turn amplified his. The air grew thick and heavy with it, a palpable, suffocating miasma of dread. It was in this supercharged moment of collective terror, with Goro at its epicenter, that a pinprick of sickly yellow light appeared in the sky above. It streaked downward, not with the hopeful azure of Izuku's ring, but with the predatory speed of a hunting wasp. It left a trail of greasy, sulphurous light in its wake, and it screamed into the alley, a high-pitched whine that sounded like a billion insects rubbing their legs together. The officers flinched, distracted by the bizarre phenomenon. The yellow light slammed to a halt in front of Goro, resolving into a ring. It was jagged and angular, unlike the smooth, calming blue of Izuku's. Its design was aggressive, almost predatory, and the yellow gem at its center seemed to drink the light from the alley, pulsing with a hungry, malevolent energy. A voice, cold and reptilian, slithered into Goro's mind. It was not a welcome, but a diagnosis. Callous Goro of Earth. You have the ability to instill great fear. The ring shot forward and clamped onto his finger. It was cold, and it felt like it had teeth. Pain. A bolt of pure, agonizing energy shot up his arm, his nerves screaming as if they were being doused in acid. But the pain was secondary to the flood of knowledge, a dark and terrible catechism that poured into his brain. He saw the universe not as a place of wonder, but as a vast, dark wilderness where only the strong and the feared could survive. He saw a magenta-skinned god-king named Sinestro, a being who had looked upon the chaos of existence and found the one true ordering principle: fear. He learned of the Sinestro Corps, an army of soldiers chosen for their ability to terrorize, to control, to dominate. And he learned the oath, the words of power that would unlock the yellow light. The officers, recovering their senses, took a step forward. What is that thing? Drop it now! Goro looked up from the ring, and for the first time in his life, he didn't feel fear. He felt its opposite. He felt like the source of it. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face, twisting his pathetic features into a mask of newfound arrogance. You want me to drop it? He rasped, his voice changing, deepening with a resonant, unnatural power. He raised his hand, the ring flaring with a nauseating yellow light. He spoke the words, and with each one, the light grew, wrapping around him like a shroud of pure nightmare. In blackest day, in brightest night, he snarled, the energy forming a jagged, insect-like armor around his body. Beware your fears made into light. The yellow energy solidified, casting grotesque, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. Let those who try to stop what's right. His quirk, his pathetic little anxiety spike, surged, amplified 1,000-fold by the ring. It was no longer a nudge. It was a psychic tidal wave of absolute terror that washed over the two officers. Burn like my power. Sinestro's might. The two policemen screamed. They didn't see Goro anymore. The older officer saw his daughter, pale and lifeless, trapped under the wreckage of a villain attack he had failed to stop. The younger one saw himself drowning, his lungs filling with black, oily water, his limbs tangled in seaweed. These weren't just illusions. The ring gave them substance. Constructs of pure fear, solid and terrifying, lunged from Goro's ring. The new villain, the being who was no longer just Callous Goro, threw his head back and laughed. It was a horrible, grating sound, the sound of a weak man given ultimate power. He looked down at his armored form, at the claws of yellow light that tipped his fingers. He needed a new name. Something to reflect his new purpose. They fear their phobias, he mused, the name clicking into place with a sense of perfect, terrible clarity. I am their phobias. He rose into the air on a column of crackling yellow energy, leaving the two catatonic officers in the alley below. He had spent his life scuttling in the shadows. Now, it was time to cast a shadow of his own, one large enough to suffocate the entire city. The Kiyoshi Ward shopping mall was a monument to weekend consumerism. A bustling, multi-story complex of bright lights, cheerful music, and the constant, happy hum of thousands of people. It was a place of casual, thoughtless security, the kind of place where nothing bad was ever supposed to happen, which made it the perfect stage. Phoebus descended into the central atrium like a wrathful god, landing on the large decorative fountain with a crash that sent water and terrified koi fish everywhere. He stood there, encased in his jagged yellow armor, the light of his ring pulsing like a diseased heart. For a moment, there was just stunned silence. Shoppers froze, their bags dropping from their hands, their conversations dying in their throats. Then, the screaming began. He's a villain! Panic erupted, a beautiful, chaotic symphony to Phoebus's ears. The crowd surged, people trampling each other in a desperate attempt to reach the exits. This was what he had always craved, not just their fear, but their undivided attention. Stay right where you are, he boomed, his amplified voice echoing through the atrium. The show is just beginning. He held up his ring, and the ambient fear of the crowd acted like gasoline on a fire. The yellow light exploded outward. He didn't create anything specific at first, just abstract horrors. Tendrils of blackish yellow energy snaked through the crowd, tripping people. The lights in the mall flickered and died, replaced by the ghastly yellow glow. The cheerful pop music warped into a discordant, screeching dirge. Then, the pro-heroes arrived. The first on the scene was the rookie sensation, Empty Lady. She appeared at the massive skylight of the atrium, having used her gigantification quirk to peer inside. "Don't you worry, everyone," she announced, her voice a practiced, confident boom. "Why? Because I am here." She prepared to smash through the glass, a grand, heroic entrance. But as she looked down at the scene, Phoebus's ring flared, and his amplified quirk hit her like a physical blow. It wasn't a construct that stopped her. It was a thought, a seed of pure terror planted directly into her mind. "You're too big. You'll bring the whole building down. Look at them, so small, so fragile. You'll crush hundreds of them. Their blood will be on your hands. They'll call you a monster, not a hero. A clumsy, destructive freak." Empty Lady froze. The crushing weight of responsibility, the deepest fear of every hero with a large-scale quirk, became her entire reality. She saw visions of the roof collapsing, of concrete and steel raining down on screaming families. She saw the headlines, the accusations, the end of her nascent career. She backed away from the skylight, her breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps, her gigantified form trembling. She was paralyzed by the very power that was supposed to make her a hero. Next came Kamui Woods, swinging in through a shattered window on a branch of wood, his movements precise and efficient. "Cease your villainy! I will bind you with my lacquered chain prison." He shot his arms forward, branches snaking toward Phoebus. But again, the yellow light pulsed. Kamui didn't see a villain on the fountain. He saw a horrifying vision of his own body. He felt the phantom sensation of his wooden limbs becoming dry and brittle, infested with termites. He saw them splintering, cracking, turning to dust in his hands, leaving him a helpless, limbless torso. His control faltered, his branches retracting as if recoiling from a fire. The hero whose entire fighting style was based on control and precision had lost control of himself. Phoebus cackled, drinking in their terror. It made him stronger, the yellow light around him burning brighter. He began to create more specific constructs, feeding on the fears of the trapped civilians. For a man terrified of spiders, a bus-sized arachnid of shimmering yellow light descended from the ceiling on a thick, glowing web. For a woman with a fear of drowning, the floor seemed to ripple and transform into a stormy sea of grasping, spectral hands. The heroes were helpless. Their quirks were useless against an enemy who attacked the mind. Every civilian who panicked, every hero who hesitated, was another battery charging the engine of their own nightmare. The color of fear was painting the entire mall, and no one knew how to stop it. The atmosphere in Yuehai's specialized training observation room was tense. The room, provided by the ever-prepared Principal Nizu for Izuku and All Might's unique sessions, was a dome of reinforced glass and steel that overlooked one of the larger training grounds. But today, all eyes were on the massive holographic screen that dominated one wall, showing live news feeds from the Kiyoshi Ward Mall. Izuku stood rigid, his fists clenched, his knuckles white. He watched the chaos, the monstrous yellow constructs, the terrified faces of the civilians. He felt a sickening sense of familiarity. The energy, the color, the very feeling of it, it was a twisted, corrupted mirror of his own. Beside him, in his skeletal form, Toshinori Yagi leaned forward, his elbows on the control console, his expression grim. "This is no ordinary villain," he rasped, his analytical eyes scanning the footage. "His quirk seems to be psychological, but that light, the constructs are solid. They have mass. They're interacting with the environment. That kind of energy output isn't a quirk. It's something else, something foreign." "It is," Izuku said, his voice quiet but firm. Toshinori turned to him, his brow furrowed. "You recognize it?" Izuku nodded, his gaze unwavering from the screen where a giant yellow snake was currently chasing a group of shoppers. "The ring gave me information. A lot of it. It calls it the emotional spectrum, the idea that all the sentient life in the universe, through their emotions, generates a corresponding energy field. A color of light." He took a breath, trying to process the cosmic concepts into simple words. "My ring is powered by the blue light of hope. The Green Lantern's All Might's files mentioned are powered by the green light of will. There are others, for rage, avarice, compassion, love. He pointed a trembling finger at the screen, at the villain cackling on the fountain. And that is the yellow light of fear. Tashinori's eyes widened, the implications hitting him with the force of a physical blow. A universe of powers completely unrelated to quirks. So this villain, he's like you? He was chosen? Yes, Izuku confirmed, a chill running down his spine. By the Sinestro Corps. Their one goal is to enforce order throughout the universe by spreading fear. They believe hope is a lie and fear is the only true reality. Each member is chosen for their ability to instill great fear in others. The pieces clicked into place for Tashinori. The hero's paralysis, the escalating chaos. They're feeding him, he whispered, his eyes fixed on the terrified crowds. The more afraid people are, the stronger he gets. It's a feedback loop from hell. It's worse than that, Izuku added, his mind racing through the information the ring had provided. A blue lantern's hope can supercharge a green lantern's will. It's a symbiotic relationship. But the yellow light, it's parasitic. It actively seeks out and preys upon the green light. Willpower can be overcome by fear. The Sinestro Corps was founded specifically to hunt and destroy the Green Lantern Corps. The strategic situation was suddenly, terrifyingly clear. This wasn't just a powerful villain. This was the first soldier in an invasion, wielding a weapon that was ideologically and functionally designed to dismantle everything heroes stood for. Heroes inspired hope and acted with will. This creature consumed both. On the screen, another hero arrived. Eraserhead. He dropped into the atrium from a vent, his movements silent and fluid. His capture weapon shot out, wrapping around Phobius. His hair stood on end. His eyes glowed a menacing red. His quirk is gone, Tashinori said, a flicker of hope in his voice. Now, but nothing happened. The yellow armor around Phobius didn't flicker. The giant spider construct didn't vanish. Phobius simply looked down at the tough-as-steel alloy weapon wrapped around him, then back at Eraserhead, and laughed. Your little party trick doesn't work on me, hero, Phobius sneered. This power isn't a quirk. It's a gift from a god. A set of massive, glowing yellow shears formed in the air and snipped through Eraserhead's capture weapon with ease. The hope in the observation room died. Izuku's blood ran cold. Eraserhead, the ultimate anti-quirk hero, was powerless. The rules of their world did not apply here. All Might slammed his fist on the console. Nizu is already scrambling the top 10 heroes, but they'll be coming from all over the prefecture. It will take time. Time that those people don't have. He looked at Izuku, his expression torn. This is a threat on a level we've never seen. I have to go, Izuku said, the words leaving his lips before he had even consciously decided. Absolutely not. Tashinori countered instantly, turning to face him fully. Young Midoriya, listen to me. You're not ready. Your training is incomplete. We don't know the full extent of this enemy's power. Going in now is reckless. We need a plan. We need to coordinate with the other heroes. He was right. Every logical part of Izuku's brain knew his mentor was right. It was the sensible, strategic thing to do. It was what a pro would do, but the ring on his finger was humming, a gentle, insistent warmth spreading through his hand. It was a call to action, a reminder of his purpose. Hope didn't wait for a perfect plan. Hope didn't hide until the odds were favorable. Hope charged into the darkness, because its very presence was a weapon. You're not listening, Izuku said, his voice filled with a desperate certainty. Every second we wait, his power grows. The fear is spreading. Waiting is the worst thing we could do, my light. It's the direct counter to his. It doesn't just fight his constructs, it weakens the source. It inspires hope. It can calm the crowd. It can break the feedback loop. I'm the only one who can. It's too dangerous. Tashinori insisted, his voice rising. He was no longer a mentor. He was a terrified guardian, afraid of sending a child into a war he didn't understand. You've only just learned to control your powers. And I learned that they're fueled by my will to act. Izuku shot back, his own voice filled with passion. He looked at the chaos on the screen, at Eraserhead now dodging for his life against a dozen sharp, yellow talons. I can't sit here and analyze while people are in danger. That's not why the ring chose me. It's not what being a hero is. He turned and ran for the door of the observation room. He had to get to his locker. Young Midoriya! Izuku, wait! All Might called after him, his voice filled with a desperate plea. Izuku paused at the door, his hand on the handle. He looked back at his mentor, his hero. All Might, he said, his voice softening but losing none of its resolve. On that rooftop, you told me to be realistic. But the most unrealistic thing in the world is a power fueled by hope. It exists anyway. And it's telling me to go. Please, have faith in me. He didn't wait for a reply. He slipped out the door and sprinted down the empty halls of UA, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He reached his locker, his hands fumbling with the combination lock. Inside was a simple, folded bundle. His first hero costume. His mother, after much pleading and a heavily edited version of the truth, it's a special quirk training program, had made it for him. It was simple, practical, and filled with her love. It was a durable, dark green tracksuit, with white lines that echoed All Might's own costume design. It had reinforced padding at the knees and elbows. On the chest over his heart she had carefully stitched his new symbol, the blue lantern emblem. It was a little uneven, clearly homemade, but it was perfect. He changed with frantic speed, pulling on the tracksuit and his signature red sneakers. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the blue lantern oath echoing in his mind. This was it. His first real test. He ran out into the deserted training grounds, the open sky above him. He focused, channeling the desperate hope for the people in that mall, the burning need to prove that fear was not the ultimate power. The blue light enveloped him. With a surge of energy and a silent prayer, he shot into the sky, a streak of brilliant azure against the afternoon sun. He was a living comet of hope, aimed directly at the heart of the city's new nightmare. Eraserhead was not a hero built for protracted fights. He was an ambush predator, ending fights before they began by stealing his opponent's greatest weapon. Against this thing, however, he was just a man with a scarf and a death wish. His quirk was useless. His capture weapon was easily destroyed. All he had left was his agility and his wits, and they were rapidly failing him. Phoebus was toying with him, enjoying the chase. He wasn't even using his full power. He was savoring the pro-hero's professional, controlled exterior cracking under the strain. He sent constructs of Eraserhead's own students, Midoriya, Bakugo, all of them, pale and broken, blaming him for failing to protect them. Shota Aizawa gritted his teeth, forcing the images from his mind. It was an illogical psychological attack. But the ring made it feel real. The weight of his students' phantom bodies, the chill of their imagined deaths. It was a heavy burden. You see? Phoebus crowed, floating above the chaos. Even the strongest will crack under the right pressure. There is nothing fear cannot conquer. He decided he was done playing. He raised his hand, and the yellow light consolidated. It formed a massive, grotesque construct, a demonic, clawed hand, 20 feet wide, wreathed in yellow flames. It descended on Eraserhead, who was momentarily pinned down by a construct of thick, grasping chains. He had nowhere to run. He closed his eyes, bracing for the impact. This was it. An illogical way to die. He heard the roar of the impact, a sound like a thunderclap and a monstrous beast's snarl combined. But there was no pain. He opened his eyes. The claw was there, inches from his face, straining, vibrating with furious energy. But it was not touching him. It was being held back, a shield. A brilliant, translucent shield of the purest, most calming blue he had ever seen. It was circular, intricate patterns of light swirling across its surface like a mandala. It hummed with a powerful, peaceful energy that seemed to physically push back against the oppressive aura of fear that filled them all. The very air around him felt lighter, cleaner. The phantom despair that had been weighing on his soul lifted. He looked to the source of the shield. Floating in the center of the atrium, between him and Phoebus, was a boy in a simple green tracksuit with a hand-stitched symbol on his chest. His hair was a wild mess of green and black, and his eyes, visible even from this distance, blazed with a fierce, unwavering determination. It was his student. Problem child. Midoriya Izuku. Phobius stared, his smug grin replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. You, he hissed, recognizing the color, the energy, from the intel Sinestro's ring had provided. The source, the hope of this mudball world. Izuku didn't answer. He just held his ground, his right arm outstretched, the blue ring on his finger shining like a newborn star. The shield held, not with strain, but with an absolute, indomitable certainty. The color of hope had arrived to challenge the color of fear. The arrival of the blue light was not a cataclysm. It was not an explosion or a thunderclap. It was something far more profound. It was a change in the very atmosphere of the Kiyoshi Ward Mall. The oppressive, suffocating blanket of terror that Phobius had woven, an aura that made the air feel thick and lungs struggle for breath, suddenly thinned. It was like a window being thrown open in a stale, smoke-filled room. The first to feel it were the civilians. A woman cowering from a monstrous yellow spider looked up, and the all-consuming panic in her chest eased, replaced by a flicker of stunned wonder. A man trapped in a hallucinatory drowning saw the spectral hands grasping at him become less substantial, their terrifying grip weakening. The collective hyperventilation of the crowd began to subside into shuddering, gasping breaths. They weren't safe yet, but for the first time since the attack began, it felt possible. The source of this change was the boy in the green tracksuit, floating in the center of the atrium. He was the epicenter of a silent, radiant pulse of pure, calming energy. His ring wasn't just projecting a shield. It was broadcasting a message directly into the hearts of everyone present, a message more powerful than any spoken word. All will be well. Phobius felt it too, not as a comfort, but as an agony. The blue light was anathema to his power. The fear he had so carefully cultivated, the very fuel for his constructs, was being diluted, neutralized. The giant yellow claw pressing against Izuku's shield wavered, its form becoming less defined as the terror sustaining it began to ebb. No! Phobius shrieked, a sound of fury and violation. He poured more of his own will into the construct, forcing the raw energy of the Sinestro core ring to compensate for the diminishing fear of the crowd. The claw solidified again, pressing harder. You cannot undo my work. Fear is the only truth. Izuku gritted his teeth, the force against his shield immense. It was like holding back a landslide. But the shield was not a product of muscle. It was a manifestation of his belief, and his belief, forged in the fires of a lifetime of adversity and tempered by 10 months of grueling, purpose-driven labor, was absolute. He needs help, Izuku thought, his eyes darting down to erase her head, who was still tangled in the yellow chains. I can't just defend. I have to save. The word save resonated with the ring. This was the core of his hope, the foundation of his dream. His power was not for fighting, it was for protecting. It was for being the person who runs in when everyone else runs out. He split his focus. A sliver of the blue energy from his shield flowed down his arm, into the ring, and then shot out as a thin, precise beam. It didn't strike the chains with force. It simply touched them, and the yellow light they were composed of seemed to curdle. The construct, a manifestation of the fear of being trapped, fizzled and dissolved into harmless yellow motes, as the calming blue energy overrode its emotional frequency. Shota Aizawa was free. He scrambled to his feet, his mind reeling. He had been completely outmatched, seconds from death, only to be saved by his own student. He looked up at the floating boy, at the unwavering blue shield holding back a monster, and felt something he hadn't experienced in a very long time. It wasn't just relief. It was a profound, humbling sense of awe. Midoriya, he breathed, the name a statement of disbelief. Izuku glanced down, giving his teacher a brief, determined nod. He couldn't speak, his concentration focused on the battle of wills being waged against his shield. But his message was clear: I'll hold him off. Get the civilians out. Aizawa didn't need to be told twice. His professional instincts, momentarily shattered by Phobius's psychological assault, came roaring back to life, bolstered by the calming aura emanating from Izuku. He was no longer just a man fighting a monster. He was a hero with a vital role to play. Everyone! To me! He yelled, his voice cutting through the remaining panic with practiced authority. Stay low and follow me. Evacuate through the north exit. His words, combined with the palpable wave of hope from Izuku, broke the spell of fear. People began to move, not in a panic stampede, but with a desperate, coordinated purpose. They scrambled over overturned kiosks and through shattered storefronts, their eyes fixed on the hero who was guiding them to safety. Phoebus saw his power source escaping. He roared in frustration, abandoning his assault on Izuku's shield. The giant claw dissolved, and in its place, he formed a dozen smaller, faster constructs, vicious, dog-like creatures made of jagged yellow light. "You will not escape," he screamed, sending the hounds leaping down toward the fleeing crowd. This was the ideological battleground laid bare. Phoebus fought by attacking the innocent, by spreading fear and chaos. Izuku, in turn, fought by protecting them. He didn't try to intercept the hounds with beams or blasts. His ring was still limited offensively. Instead, he flew down, placing himself between the constructs and the civilians. His shield vanished, and in its place, he wove the blue light into new forms. A massive, curved wall of shimmering azure light erupted from the floor, blocking the hound's path. It was a simple, defensive construct, but it was imbued with his unshakable hope, and the yellow constructs recoiled from its touch as if from a hot iron. One of the hounds, more tenacious than the others, leaped over the wall. It zeroed in on a small child who had tripped and fallen, separated from his mother. The boy stared up at the snarling, luminous beast, his face a mask of pure terror. Izuku was there in an instant. He didn't form another wall. He formed a construct of a giant, gentle hand, the kind a loving parent might use to scoop up their child. The blue, translucent hand gently wrapped around the boy, lifting him up and out of harm's way, shielding him completely. The hound slammed into the construct, its form flickering and sputtering as the pure hope of the protective gesture destabilized its fearful energy. The boy, safe within the hand of light, looked down not with fear, but with wide-eyed wonder. From the other side of the atrium, Eraserhead watched, coordinating the evacuation, while his mind raced. He was seeing the birth of a new kind of hero. Midoriya wasn't fighting like All Might, with overwhelming power. He wasn't fighting like Endeavor, with destructive force. He wasn't even fighting like a traditional hero. He was a pure defender. A guardian. Every action he took was designed not to defeat the enemy, but to save the innocent. His constructs weren't weapons, they were answers to prayers. Phoebus grew more and more enraged. This boy was undoing everything. He was a walking, flying nullification of his entire worldview. "If you love these insects so much," he snarled, his voice dripping with venom, "then you can share their fate." He unleashed a new attack, a wide-area assault. The floor of the atrium cracked, and dozens of thick, thorny vines made of yellow light erupted, trying to ensnare the remaining civilians. Izuku countered immediately. He flew high into the air, the blue lantern symbol on his chest glowing brightly. He raised his ring and sent out a pulse of energy, not a destructive wave, but a soothing one. The pulse washed over the crowd. It didn't just calm them, it inspired them. The fear that had paralyzed them was replaced by a surge of courage. A man who had been frozen in terror suddenly grabbed a nearby fire extinguisher and sprayed it at one of the vine constructs, the CO2 causing the light to flicker and distort. A group of teenagers, instead of running, started helping the elderly and injured, forming a human chain to guide them toward Eraserhead. Izuku had turned the entire crowd from a collection of victims into a unified force of resistance. They couldn't fight the villain directly, but they could fight the fear. They could help each other, they could hope. And then Izuku discovered a new application of his power, one the ring's initial flood of information had only hinted at. He saw Eraserhead, weary and battered, straining to pull a heavy, overturned kiosk off a trapped woman's leg. The hero was at his limit, his stamina drained from the earlier psychic assault. Izuku focused on his teacher. He felt a surge of admiration, of hope for him. He pushed that feeling, that specific belief in Eraserhead's heroism, through the ring. A thin, almost invisible beam of blue light shot from Izuku's ring and enveloped Aizawa. Shota Aizawa gasped. The bone-deep weariness that had been dragging him down vanished. The aches in his muscles faded. A wave of warmth and vigor washed over him, a second wind so potent it felt like he just had 12 hours of sleep and a gallon of coffee. He wasn't just refreshed, he felt bolstered. more capable. The despair that had been clawing at the edges of his mind was gone, replaced by a clear, sharp focus. With a defiant roar, he heaved, and the heavy kiosk lifted, freeing the woman. What? Aizawa looked at his hands, then up at Izuku. From his vantage point, Izuku felt the connection. He could feel his teacher's renewed strength. I can supercharge people, he realized with a jolt of shock. Not just green lanterns. My hope can inspire and strengthen anyone who is willing to act on it. This was the true power of the Blue Lantern. Not to fight alone, but to make everyone around him a hero in their own right. He had become a mobile command and control center, a beacon that didn't just light the way, but gave others the strength to walk it. From the corner of his eye, Izuku saw Bakugo. He was with a group of other UA students from another class who had been at the mall. While others were running, Bakugo was standing his ground, his hands crackling with explosions, a defiant scowl on his face. He was protecting a small group of civilians huddled behind a pillar, blasting any yellow construct that got too close. He was acting like a hero. For a moment, Izuku felt a surge of pride for his rival. He considered sending a beam of blue light his way, to bolster him as he had Eraserhead. But he hesitated. Bakugo's power came from his anger, his pride, his overwhelming will to be the best. Would the calming light of hope help him, or hinder him? He didn't know enough about how the emotional energies interacted. It was a risk he couldn't take. The dynamic of the battle had completely shifted. Phobius was no longer a terrifying god presiding over a chaotic nightmare. He was a single villain being systematically dismantled by a coordinated evacuation effort led by a pro-hero, and supported by a boy made of starlight. His constructs, once terrifying, were now just obstacles, and the civilians, inspired and emboldened, were navigating them with increasing efficiency. Phobius knew he was losing. The tide of fear had receded, and he was left stranded on an island of his own rage. He had to end this. He had to break the source of this infuriating hope. He turned his full attention, his full power, on the boy in green. He seethed, all his constructs dissolving as he drew the yellow light back into himself, a vortex of terrifying energy swirling around him. You are the disease. And I am the cure. He decided to stop attacking Izuku's body. He would attack his soul. The yellow light flared, and the world around Izuku warped. The sounds of the evacuation, the shouts of Eraserhead, the distant wail of sirens, it all faded away, replaced by a suffocating silence. The mall dissolved into a familiar, dreaded scene, the drab, gray classroom of Aldera Junior High. He was a child again, small and quirkless, standing before his desk. And all around him were his classmates, their faces twisted into cruel, laughing masks. Their voices, amplified by the power of the yellow ring, echoed in his mind, a chorus of his deepest insecurities. Look, it's useless Deku. He still thinks he can be a hero. What a loser. He's just a quirkless nobody. He'll never amount to anything. He saw Bakugo, his childhood friend, sneering at him, smoke rising from his palms. If you want to be a hero so bad, why don't you take a swan dive off the roof of the building? Maybe you'll be born with a quirk in your next life. The words were knives, each one twisting in a wound that had never truly healed. Then the vision shifted. He was on the rooftop, the wind cold, All Might's skeletal form standing before him, his face a mask of pity. Be realistic, kid. It's not wrong to dream, but you need to face reality. The images came faster, a brutal montage of every moment of failure, every ounce of pity, every jeer and dismissive glance he had ever endured. It was the collective weight of a lifetime of being told he was not good enough. Phobius's voice over-narrated the nightmare. This is you, he hissed in Izuku's mind. A fraud. A joke. You have no power of your own. You were just given a trinket by a universe that made a mistake. Underneath that light, you are still the same quirkless, worthless little boy. You have no hope. You never did. You just had a delusion. The final, most cruel construct formed before him. It was a vision of himself, broken and crying on the ground, his green tracksuit torn and muddy. The blue ring on his finger was dark and lifeless. The constructs of his laughing classmates, and a disappointed All Might stood over him, pointing and mocking. This was Phobius's ultimate weapon, a construct of Izuku's own deepest fear, that he was, and always would be, a complete and utter failure. The blue light around Izuku flickered violently. The constructs he had created to protect the last few civilians wavered. In the real world, Eraserhead saw the boy falter in midair, his body trembling, the brilliant azure aura dimming to a faint shimmer. Midoriya! He yelled, a new, cold fear gripping him. In the psychic prison of his own mind, Izuku felt his hope begin to crumble. The weight was too much. Phoebus was right. He was that boy. He was quirkless. He had been pathetic. The ring had chosen him, but what if it was a mistake? What if he wasn't worthy? His own hope was failing. The ring grew cold on his finger. But then, through the cacophony of his own self-doubt, another memory surfaced. Not one of failure, but one of purpose. The memory of the sun rising over a clean beach. The feeling of his aching muscles, the satisfaction of a job well done. The sound of a child's laughter on the sand he had cleared with his own 2 hands. The memory of Toshinori's proud smile. You have to give yourself a reason to believe. The phantoms of his past continued their assault, but their words began to lose their power. They were describing a boy who didn't exist anymore. That boy hadn't moved a mountain of trash. That boy hadn't earned the respect of his idol. That boy hadn't just saved dozens of lives. He looked at the construct of his broken self, crying on the floor. He saw the fear in its eyes, the despair in its posture. And he didn't feel shame. He felt compassion. You're right, Izuku said, his voice quiet but steady within the illusion. The flickering blue light around him stabilized, then began to glow, brighter than before. That was me. He took a step toward the construct of his failure, not with anger, but with acceptance. I was weak. I was scared. I was a boy who cried all the time because the world told him he was nothing, he continued, his voice growing stronger with every word. The blue light around him intensified, a peaceful, radiant dawn breaking through the sickly yellow twilight of the nightmare. But that boy, even at his lowest, never, ever gave up on his dream. He held on to a tiny flicker of hope when he had every reason to let it die. He looked past the construct, past the taunting phantoms, as if seeing Phoebus himself. You think showing me my past will break me? My past is what makes me strong. All that pain, all that doubt, it's the soil my hope grew from. You can't use my fear against me, because I'm not afraid of who I was. And I have hope for who I can become. His declaration was a conviction, a fundamental truth that resonated with the very core of his being. And the ring on his finger responded. It was not a beam or a blast. It was a wave. A tidal wave of pure, concentrated blue light, of hope incarnate, erupted from him. It wasn't an attack designed to harm or destroy. It was an overwhelming force of positive emotion, a psychic sunrise that simply did not allow the shadows of fear to exist. The yellow constructs of his past didn't shatter, they evaporated like mist. The drab classroom, the mocking faces, the disappointed hero, it all dissolved in the face of his absolute, unwavering acceptance. The psychic prison was obliterated. Back in the mall, the effect was catastrophic for Phoebus. The wave of blue energy washed over him, and while it didn't burn him physically, it struck at the heart of his power. The connection to his ring sputtered. The yellow light, fed by fear, was being smothered by the sheer volume of hope. It was like trying to light a match in a hurricane. Phoebus screamed, clutching his head as his own deepest fears, being weak, being a no-account parasite again, surfaced, no longer suppressed by the ring's power. The jagged yellow armor around him cracked and fell away in chunks of dying light. Impossible. He stammered, his power short-circuiting. The ring on his finger, overwhelmed by an opposing emotional energy it could not process, began to glow a furious, angry red, an error message. Izuku lowered his hand, breathing heavily, the blue aura around him slowly receding to a gentle, steady glow. He had won. Not by punching, not by blasting, but by being true to himself. The yellow ring on Phoebus's finger gave a final, screeching wail of electronic protest. It released its host, flinging the now powerless Chaos Goro to the ground in a heap, before shooting up through the shattered skylight and vanishing into the sky, a defeated yellow star streaking back to its dark master. Goro lay on the wet floor by the fountain, just a pathetic, terrified man once more. Eraserhead was on him in a second, his capture weapon wrapping around the depowered villain, this time for good. The battle was over. The last of the civilians were being escorted out by other heroes who were just arriving on the scene. Paramedics were tending to the injured. The world had just witnessed a new kind of hero, one who fought not with fists, but with light. Izuku slowly floated to the ground, his legs feeling weak. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a deep, bone-grinding exhaustion in its place. He looked at the scene, the damage, the relieved faces of the people he'd saved, his teacher giving a statement to the police. He had done it. His first light had been enough to hold back the nightmare. For today,